feeling good, can I tell?
Yeah, good. Okay, hold that family. My name is Brother Ray Ray. I'd like to welcome everyone to the William Mackey Jr. History Club. You got the red button on, Rod? Yes, sir. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club. We meet here every other Wednesday in honor of William Mackey Jr., Louis Ray Rivera, Brother Gil Noble, El Haj Malik El Shabazz, Professor Amos Wilson, Ivan Van Sertima, Sister Leola Maddox, Brother Harry,
Yes, sir.
Dr. Clark,
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Ben,
Yes.
Minister Khalid, and all the historians throughout the world that gave up fame and fortune. They didn't have to do what they did, family. They really sacrificed because they could have went the way of riches, big cars, and they chose to study, burn the midnight oil because they believed in history and information. And that's what we're about at the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr.'s History Club, communicating with the community to give information. So the people that's here in the open forum at the Mackeys, please give yourself a big hand. And as always, our Zoom audience for people that's out of town that still support the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club. Give yourself a big hand for all this. We appreciate you very much. And we all one big happy family, and we just tried our best to give information and help each other out. So we're going to bring the camera over to these books. This is in honor of Amos Wilson and Brother Sababu of African World Info Systems, who's still trying his best to bring the great work of Amos alive. We support him, and we have his books. This is what I call the Amos collection. The first book is Blueprint for Black Power. That's the best read out. The second book is The Psychology of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat Toward a Reclamation of the African Mind. This was the book, Sababa just finished this in honor of Amos. It is one of the best reads out. We have African-Centered Consciousness versus the New World Order. You hear a lot of people today talk about the New World Order. Oh, the New World Order, the Great Reset, all this. Amos wrote this book years ago. Amos's classic, Black on Black Violence, the psychodynamic of black self-annihilation in service of white domination. And I'm going to say something right quick. You hear it all the time. Every time you turn around, some phony, some politician, crime is unbelievable. We have to do something about this. I'm scared to ride the trains. What is going on? I can't believe it. We need more federal dollars.
Sounds just like
Never mention Amos. The psychodynamics of black self-annihilation in service of white domination. Amos's classic, Black on Black. I want to thank Amos on that. Also, The Falsification of African Consciousness, Eurocentric History, Psychology, and the Politics of White Supremacy. Issues of manhood in black and white. The inclusive look of masculinity and the society definition of the African man. Another classic, Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children. We have S.K. Damian, Distorted Truths and the Bastardization of African Cosmology. In honor of Louis Ray Rivera, we have his classic, Jazz in Jail. And we also have Terrence McLaughlin, Dirt, the society historical as seen through the use and abuse of dirt. This will tell you a lot of things that was happening in Europe. And it's a hard book, and it's a very small book. Confronting the Color Crisis of the African Diaspora. And we have Sister Etta Dixon, I Am a Wellness Witness. Now we have a couple of more books that I'm going to tell you. we have, and I'd like to just put the title of it, in honor of Dr. Ben. They have too many computers. This book is Dr. Ben's classic. Black Man in the Nile and His Family, in honor of Dr. Ben. Tim Wise, White Like Me, Reflections on Race from a Privileged Son. The Invention of the White Race, The Origin of Racial Oppression in Anglo-America, Theodore Allen. Our sister Carol Alexander, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide, White Rage. We'd like to help Dr. Randy Short with his publication, Slavery Mastery, The Impact of Religious Slavery Revealed, in honor of Charles Hamilton Houston and the struggle for civil rights. A lot of people getting civil rights now, ain't pay no dues. Edwin Black, The Transfer Agreement, in honor of Big Harold. Of course, he's the first one I heard. I didn't hear about this book until Big Harold told us at Mackey's. So we have these publications, and I got a couple of more that I feel is very much important. Dr. Scott Whitaker gave an excellent lecture down in Baltimore this past week. His book, Medicine, The Causes and Solutions to the Disease, Malnutrition, and the Medical Sins That Are Killing the World. Yeah. The Irritated Genie. His book, Jews Are the Problem. If you go on War on the Horizon website and you want to support the Irritated Genie, this book is fantastic. It's a small read, but it's going to take you a while to do the research. COVID-19, the truth about COVID-19, exposing the Great Reset, lockdown, vaccine passports. Dr. Cummins and Dr. McCullough and Robert Kennedy Jr., The Real Fauci, bestseller.
Take the case, huh?
Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health. And once you read this book, the tears will roll down your eyes. And we were just talking, they have research in here that you, if you don't believe it, you could go into the research and find out yourself. This is one of the best books out. So we have these books for people to read because information, and that's what Mackey's is about, information. Okay, I'm going to read a few community events and other resources where the audience and people here, if they want to continue their search for information. Thursdays, Blog Talk Radio. Sister Keisha, Ted Ashe, Brother Black. That's our Thorough Black Talk family. That's tomorrow, 8 o'clock on Facebook Live. Also, our Philadelphia family with Sister Filet Empress Chi. Blog Talk Radio comes on at 10:30 on Saturdays. You Google Blog Talk, you type in Empress Chi, you drag down the New Day Resurrection, and they start hitting it at 10:30, and that's all through the United States. So Sister Empress Chi and our Philadelphia family is doing an excellent job. Mondays at 10 o'clock a.m. Kelmati Live, Sankofa Revolutionary Radio, WSYPLP 95.1 FM, an active African perspective out of Birmingham, Alabama. The Irritated Genie has a 10 a.m. program, and you can call in. It's fierce. And you can talk about the book, and you can purchase the book. Also, our brother Darren Muhammad, State of the City, Baltimore, 12 o'clock, Tune In Radio. And he might be on now. He gives you everything that's going on in Baltimore and the global United States. So Darren is the man coming on WEBR 1590 AM Glen Burnie, and he's also on Instagram, Muhammad the Canon, and Facebook Live. Tuesdays at 7 o'clock, Dr. Aline, Your Immunity Project, Tuesday at 7 o'clock. If you email me in the chat, he has an excellent program, comes on and he has a program right now on California radio, independent radio, no holds bars. Dr. James McIntosh, Simultac, in his program, Mindfield, comes on Wednesday at 2 o'clock. WBAI, that's another excellent program. And if you go on Simultac, you can get all the programs, what they're doing with the Simultac organization with Dr. James McIntosh. That's also available to the public. Now, we have Brother Mike Graves, Noel Lee, and Julian Harper. Community Cop Program comes on Tuesday at 5 o'clock, ManhattanNeighborhoodNetwork.org.
All right.
That's one of the top programs in the community. Also, we have our African Echoes, Newark, New Jersey study group with our brother Trust Graham.
Yeah.
They have a study group on Fridays at 8 o'clock. They're doing The Psychology of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat Toward the Reformation of the African Mind. That's Amos's classic. They've been doing it for the past 6 months, and they're only on page 21. That's how fierce this study group is. So Trust and Danny and them is really doing it up. So if you want to get involved with that study group, you put your email in the chat, and I will send you the information. Also, Saturdays, the Know Thyself study group with Brother True out of Asbury Park. Our brother Trust Graham mediates that study group too. That comes on Saturday, I believe, either 1 or 1:30. You put your email in the chat, 1 o'clock. And they're doing the Destruction of Black Civilization, Chancellor Williams. They've been on that book for 6 months, and they're only on page 25. So it's amazing on what's going on. So those are just community information that provided to the global black community. So, without further ado, if you missed last week's program, one of our own who's been a source of help with the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr.'s History Club. And you can view all of Community Cops' past programs on YouTube. You could also view all the lectures from the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr.'s History Club on YouTube under the title B.K. William Mackey Jr.'s History Club. All the past lectures. So last week, he did the role of the Black Church Part 1, and he informed us that Part 2, he's really going to come at you. Without further ado, I want the audience and the family to give a big hand to our brother, Mike Graves.
Say, I am.
I am.
Because we are.
Because we are.
I am.
I am.
Because we are.
Because we are.
You know, it's one of my deepest hopes that we believe that. Because there's an old saying that says, no man is an island. And it's true. Wherever you got, or as far as you've gotten so far, somebody helped you get there. Whether you acknowledge them or not. None of us got to a good place, a lofty place on our own. We all had help. We all had assistance. Going back simply to things like when you fell and your mother rubbed your knee, or when your nose was bleeding, your mother or your big sister or somebody helped you stop the bleeding. And that's a form of help, and we should always remember that we've had helpers along the way. If you're a spiritual person, certainly you believe that God is with you all hours of the day. If you are just spiritual in the sense that maybe you address God as creator, then you still believe that there's a higher force, something that created you. But I believe, with all of that understanding, whatever belief system you might have, that we do need each other. Now, I wish we were in a world where we didn't need each other and that you can really do your thing, whatever your thing might be. But that's not where we find ourselves now. We don't know what's going to happen when we walk out these doors later tonight. We don't know. We don't know what tomorrow holds or next week. We don't know. So there's an interdependence, whether we like it or not. You know, so let's be mindful of that. And so when I say, you know, I am because we are, if I say to you, the God in me, recognize the God in you, or if I say that which is divine in me recognizes the divinity in you, if I say namaste, that's all I'm saying. Oftentimes, that's what I open up with on Community Cop. Certainly Noel Leader or Julian Harper. I think both of them, they say Hotep. And I could certainly address them back with the Hotep, you know, Maya Hotep, Hotep Fu, and all these other things. I could, you know, say that, but I prefer to say that if I'm addressing Noel or Julian, I say that which is divine in me, again, recognizes that which is divine in you. And right now, I'm saying to all of you, namaste. I'm glad somebody hit me back. The sister was first. Y'all were a little slower, you know. She hit me first. I got her namaste because, you know, it's that way. Well, sister's more spiritual than me, for the most part anyway, even though it shifts, but more often than not, you know. But if you missed last week, it's okay, because tonight I'm going to clarify a lot of things. I was just establishing a foundation last week when I was talking about what the church is, what's the role of the church, because tonight I'm going to deal with the black church and the black experience. I'm going to fuse them and talk about why the black church is not only different from the white church. I kind of led a little last week talking about the white church is what you get from white people. There's not a significant difference for the most part, and I'll get ahead of things just to say that. There's not a significant difference in the white church and most white people. If you check out most white people and see what their concerns are, you know, and you look at what are the concerns of the white church, they're basically the same. Because white people that are so-called liberal, and for the most part that's a myth, but let's say you're talking about white people that appears to be liberal. Well, if they're as we speak, if they're invading Bed-Stuy, they've already taken over Harlem for the most part. The Harlem you and I might remember is no more. So if there's that same activity going on in Bed-Stuy, which it is, there's going to come a time where they're going to be much more aggressive, much more in terms of being dominant, taking over, and looking at you as an outsider. As you might, right now, you might still, depending on what block you're on in Bed-Stuy, might look at them as outsiders, as newcomers, as some type of insurgent. But they look at themselves as the first ones here as pilgrims, as those who are setting the groundwork for the others. And they will let each other know that at some point, that I set the groundwork for you so that you can come in and have a smooth landing. So that's what we're up against. When you see old postcards of an entire white community hanging a black man, the odds are he didn't do anything. Because the way the system goes, they didn't have to do country justice if it was so apparent that he did something. The sheriff would have done it. The sheriff would have arrested him in the proper way, and certainly would have went through the court of law and all those other things first. Now there are cases where people just came into a sheriff's department or a police station and removed that person in sheer rage and hung them, and you see the whole church oftentimes after service all there somewhere in their Sunday best, and you see children there, and the hanging takes place, and sometimes you still see the cuffs on the person. Who uses handcuffs? Law enforcement, right? So the average person does not have handcuffs. That's not to acknowledge those who do so-called kinky things that might need handcuffs for their extracurricular activities, but for the most part, that's a law enforcement thing for the most part.
Especially back then.
Yeah, especially back then, and now, you never can tell. I mean, you see people walking around with blue hair, green hair, purple, and you don't know whether this person is a male or female. And then there are even individuals that they change that up. They're fluid. They got all sorts of names, and I'm not going to try to rack my brain and try to remember the things that they call themselves, but they got people that you don't know if they are Mr. or Miss, depending on, the day or what side of the bed they wake up on. So, but anyway, the white church is complying with what the average white person does. And the average white person seeks power and authority, especially over those that are not white. Now, I talked about briefly, in just a little recap, I talked about last week, I mentioned just a few principles which I'll just go over, but I won't explain too much about it, but I'll go over it briefly. I said, what's the role of church? Not black or white, just the role of church. I mentioned things like part of what the church responsibility is to reveal the love of God. God's love, the church, the life and testimony of Jesus Christ, the knowledge of salvation, how to pray, evangelism, missionary work, to go outside the church door, greet people, talk to them, tell them about Jesus' love, fellowship, things like that are irrespective of what religion you might have. Those are all good things. Fellowship, meeting together, evangelism, ministry, worship, things like that are all things that, that creates a brotherhood, a sisterhood, a familyhood, and it leads to community. It brings a community together, belief systems, regardless of what that system might be. It brings people together, and that would apply if you were Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, and whatever other philosophical being there might be. It would lend itself to people treating each other in a moral way. And everybody wants to comport themselves with some type of moral behavior for the most part. everybody want to be moral and upright. They don't want to do nothing and break the code unless, you know, the situation calls for it. There's some people that are very mild-mannered and nice, but it don't take much to get them going. But if you don't push that button, you never know that that person is basically a quiet person. So the church gives you that. It gives you a code. You know, most people that are in church, they know how to carry themselves. You know, even children. Children stop running around as much, stop being as noisy, because they understand they're in church. And even adults change their behavior for those couple of hours that they're in church, where, you know, they would act differently outside as opposed to church, and I think we all understand. So we know that, and the purpose is just to be, for the most part, and I would ask you, regardless of agenda, is the church supposed to make you better?
Yep, sure.
The church is supposed to make you better. Anybody knows how? Or how does the church make you better? There's a lot of ways you can go with it. But how does the church make you better?
When you're teaching you, it should reinforce some basic rudiments of discipline.
It encourages discipline. Certainly, that's a key part of it. Discipline.
Character, responsibility,
Character, responsibility.
fellowship, community life.
Fellowship is very important. Community life. Those things are very important. And I dare say, if you're part of a belief system and it doesn't do those things, then why are you in it? Can you imagine a belief system where you didn't have some type of fellowship if you didn't basically discipline yourself, if you didn't or could not come together on basic moral code? That would be, you'd be in a world of trouble, wouldn't you? Because you have to have that, you have to have some basics that will unify that group. If you can't unify that group, then it's not going to be successful in whatever endeavor it might be. So that's just a basic outline of some of the church, and certainly the belief in a higher force, in a creator, in somebody that receives prayer. It's one part of it for you to pray, but you want to believe that your prayers are received and that prayer can change your life. So that's part of when a Christian, a Muslim, a Jewish person prays, they're praying for a change for the better. They want to get better at whatever it is. They want to be successful. They're praying for their family to be safe. They're praying basic things every day. It doesn't have to be exorbitant. Some people pray for $1 million or $10 million. And we'll get to some of that, hopefully, we'll get to some of that. But that's what the church represents. But the black church is different. Now we're talking about the black church specifically. The black church is different. Now the white church doesn't have nowhere near the outside problems that the black church has. And I mentioned some of them last week in past and didn't get into it, but I did mention. Did the white church have to worry about ballot access?
No.
Is that a no?
No.
Is it safe to say that the white church does not have to worry about ballot access? There's nowhere where you could put your hand on in America that white folks can't vote. They can vote anywhere. That's not a problem. It's never been a problem. So they don't have to worry about ballot access. Do white people have to worry about free speech?
No. No.
They don't have to worry about that. Is that right? Okay, so white folks don't have to worry about free speech. Do white people have to worry about their constitutional rights?
No. No.
And the Constitution, as I mentioned last week, is a very coercive document. The Constitution is coercive. It has force and power. So white folks don't have to worry about their constitutional rights being abridged by someone or some force, somewhere. They can vote. They have the right to free speech. They have the right, they have Second Amendment rights. They have the right to, whether it's an attorney, and I can bring up situations where we didn't have right to counsel. They have a right to parent-child relationships. I can show you times in our history that we didn't have that. That's something relatively new. We did not have that before the 13th Amendment. We did not have that. And I can show you situations where even after the 13th Amendment, we did not have full parent-child relationships. We can bring up situations where black people were not always involved in contracts. Now, you can engage in contracts. You can buy property. You can make investments. Wall Street. You can own not only your own property, your own business. You can invest in others and their businesses. Well, what would we have to get those rights that others get automatically? What did we use, or what could we use? Now, the black church is the most independent body in America, still to this day, for black people. It's the most independent. What do I mean by independent? I mean by independent that it can exist without white folks' dollars. It can exist without white folks' permission. Now, I'll show you cases where the line gets a little shaky on them. But for the most part, black people have the right to go to whatever church they want to, pray, fast, have communion with each other. They have those things. But you have to do more because of the situation we find ourselves in. And I'm going to mention those things. Now, what about the right to travel? Have we always had the right to travel?
No.
That's something that had to be won, the right to travel. Obviously, we could not always travel, and even when we had the rights, they could snatch that at a moment's notice. Didn't they take Paul Robeson's right to travel?
Right.
Did they take Muhammad Ali's right to travel?
Right. Well,
Now, what crime did he commit? Other than failing to step forward when his name was called, when he was drafted. He had the right, as a Muslim, not to participate in America's wars as a conscientious objector. Furthermore, he was also given the title minister. Therefore, he did not have to participate in America's wars to be a part of the war machine. Now, he did say that if there was an enemy afoot physically attacking America as we speak, he said he'll get down. He said that he would participate in. Said, but to go thousands of miles across the globe to fight and kill people that were poor, hungry, and yearning to be free, said he's not going to participate in anything like that. And that if it came down to it, he would just go to jail. So his right to travel, because he wanted to go to other countries and continue fighting. They took his passport, said you can't travel. See, so he could only move around domestically during that time. So things were happening, you know, things happened with your rights. People like Lady Day, Billie Holiday. You saw what the government did to her. You saw her right to travel taken where she could not earn money other than certain places, and obviously the certain venues refused her access. So, you know, they can do that, and you ask yourself, where's the black church on these cutting issues? And you will ask yourself something like, where are the black lawyers? Now, Rajin will tell you, and I've heard him make this argument before, about they need to throw themselves into certain situations, and he's right, that they should. Everything should not be about money. You know, you find a lot of Latino lawyers who deal with Latino causes, no charge. What's it called, pro se? No, pro se is when you do it yourself.
Pro bono?
Pro bono, pardon me.
They take
Pro
it
bono.
with legal.
Pro bono means you take the case free. Pro se means you actually defended yourself. So I think that that's some questions about the black church that, you know, I just mentioned, and certainly the black codes. The black codes is not something white people or the white church has to experience. Therefore, you want a position. Now, if I ask you about positions, you could claim you're neutral on a lot of it. If I asked everybody in this room, what's your position on A, what's your position on B, what's your position on C, you would say maybe to some things, well, I haven't thought it out yet, or I'm neutral. Neutral is a position. Now, some of you say, no, neutral is not a position. Neutral is a position.
Absolutely.
In other words, I'm walking down, what's right out there, Quincy Street. I walk outside Quincy Street, and a black woman is being raped on the spot. But she's being raped by a black man. So I look at them and I say, that's a black woman and that's a black man. I'm neutral. And so I walk by and I let it happen. What position did I take?
No.
He did take a position.
I took a position.
You have to take.
I took a position to condone what that black man is doing. Because she was resisting, he was the aggressor, taking what he wanted, And I chose to say, you know what, I'm neutral. Nah, there's two black people. I'm gonna mind my business. Well, I condoned his actions because I supported him by not doing anything. So, brother, you're right. I took a position. Now, you can call it neutral or you want it. It wasn't neutral.
Or apolitical.
Yeah, I took a position. And that position was, I allowed that to happen right there in front of me, and I supported the black man that did it. And anybody that has true eyes that see it, if I tell them later, nah, I was just neutral. No, sir, wasn't neutral. I was out of order, wrong, and I went against our history of black women being raped for the last 500 years by white men. And so just because this person was black, I condone it. That's wrong. So just, you know, that's just some things that the black church has to consider. So I went through some of those things last week, so that's the inner part one. The black church, as I said before, the black church came into existence, and I won't go into that history again. You know that whether it's okay, I'll just mention this. Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, they were the pioneers in Philadelphia, starting the black church. I mentioned that Reverend George Lely, he founded the First Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia in 1777. Obviously, that was during slavery time, so the only ones that were participating was those who were free. And like I said, with Richard Allen and Absalom Jones in Philadelphia, that was for free people because that was during slavery. And that was great for them to start because that was the beginning of the unity that eventually brought on the anti-slavery campaigns, the abolitionists, what have you. Now, let me just ask you, if in the church your thing is devotion, fellowship, and praying, but now you find that there are people that are fighting slavery, that there are people that are escaping from the so-called slave master. As a black church, do you have to take a position if you're going to help them, assist them? Do you have to take a position, whether officially or unofficially?
Whether or not you take a position, like you just said, you take a position either way.
Okay, what should the position be?
Okay. That's a different question.
What should it be? The reason why I'm asking you that, because I'm going to give you a scenario that actually happened. This is some serious stuff. And the condition is not far removed from what we find ourselves in today. Okay, let's go to 1843, Buffalo, New York. Now, this is some serious stuff, and the reason why I'm saying that is because this is stuff that's still going on to this very day. And I'm going to show you how it does. In 1843, delegates from all over America met upstate New York for the express purpose to decide what was going to be the move in terms of slavery, in terms of uniting and having close contact with other black organizations from all over the country, even though most of them were all church-based. they met in Buffalo, New York in 1843. So obviously, that was 18 years before the Civil War. They met there trying to decide on what they were going to do. Now, they had a few meetings prior to that, delegates, going back to 1835. And they did a few follow-up meetings after that. Here's what happened at the National Convention of 1843. These Confederates, these Christian groups met to decide on what are the issues of the day and how are they going to work these things out. Among them was the great Henry Highland Garnet, one of the baddest brothers we've ever had. Henry Highland Garnet. If you don't know the name, write it down. If you don't want to write it down, put it in your phone, put it somewhere, and look him up later. Henry Highland Garnet. He's famous for, his call to arms. Now, at that meeting, he told black people it's time to rise up. Reverend, let me say his whole name, Reverend Henry Highland Garnet. He said it's time. He said it's time to rise. Now,
Where'd you get that bottle? Home Depot, man? Yes, it's the food.
Now, what Henry Highland Garnet suggested is that his message to slaves were to rise up against your slave master. Now, to you out here today, you might not think much of that message. You might say that's no big deal. I'm here tonight to tell you that that was a big deal.
Huge.
To put that message out. To tell slaves, rise up against your slave master. He was advocating armed struggle. This is coming from a Reverend Henry Highland Garnet, talking about armed struggle. Now, if you want a plantation and you have the so-called slave master and his family, and you have an overseer, a few white people that are workers, but the majority of the people you're going to have on those plantations are what? Enslaved African slaves. Consequently, you tell them all, look, if you make it happen, you good. Because if you take over those few people, take those guns and weapons and take over, it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And it's nothing against God. Because for the most part, many slaves were taught that that's against God. That's not the Bible. They were taught to respect the slave master, as you see in some scriptures. So, for Henry Highland Garnet to say that, it was met with opposition there in 1843. Can you imagine some people, they're delegates. Now, you got delegates, you got well-educated, you have some doctors, you got military people, you have business people, you have a whole, everything was there. Everybody under the sun was there in Buffalo. And so when he gave that call to rebellion speech, it wasn't met with applause. It was some consternation. There were those who were supportive of that. and some that didn't know. They were in that middle ground.
Was the majority against him?
Well, I'll tell you what. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you. It did come down to a vote as what Ray is questioning. It did come down to a vote. Now, the person who gave the strongest opposition to Henry Highland Garnett was who? Who?
Next Reverend.
Is another person was Christian, and unfortunately, this person, in my opinion, might be the greatest orator of all time.
Don't say Douglas.
What's that?
Douglas?
Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was the one
That didn't want.
that didn't want it, that was vociferously against it.
Wow.
He was
In
against
other
John Brown
words,
too, right?
what's that?
He was against John Brown
That's
too.
correct.
Well, he wasn't against John Brown, he just wouldn't support it.
Yeah.
Now that was like 57.
So that's a new position too.
1857.
1857.
So, I like that, right? That's a good one. That's the position he took.
Yeah, but that was it.
His position was, go ahead, I ain't gonna squeal on you, but I'm not rolling with you, Doc. You know, I'm not rolling with
That's suicide.
you. You know, Harper's Ferry. He wouldn't roll with,
But I hear you.
yeah, you know, he wouldn't roll with John Brown, but he's like, I'm not against it, but I'm not for it. You know, Harriet Tubman said she's with it. She said, I got my 4-5, I'm with it. She just didn't get there in time. You know, so it was one of those things.
What about Ida B. Wells? What about us?
Well, Ida B. Wells wasn't around yet.
Oh, okay.
You know, but knowing Ida B. Wells, the way she whipped that conductor that was trying to throw off the train, the way she, you know, fought him hard, and until he was successful in finally overpowering her and throwing her off the train, the way she put up that good fight. Wasn't she a fox, though? Tell the truth. Ida B. Wells, she was a judge when she was in the courtroom over, you know, because the train conductor did say that she assaulted him. The judge looked at Ida B. Wells and looked at the grown man, the big man, and looked at her and said, I know you're white, but I can't believe that this lady assaulted you.
She did.
Right, what you said, she did, yeah. She wasn't going to allow herself to be thrown off the train just like that, because she paid like everybody else. But in any event, perhaps the greatest orator of all time, Fred Douglass, when he got up, because he was the vice president of that whole convention. He was the number 2 man. And when he started speaking and weighed in with all the support that Reverend Henry Highland Garnett had, because he had a lot of people that was with him on that, when Fred Douglass was finished saying we should not give in to violence, he said that we need peaceful means to negotiate slavery. He wanted slavery to end, but he wanted to end in a certain way, and that's through negotiation. And Henry Highland Garnett said, when does a person in power just surrender their power to you? Because you asked.
That's deep.
He said, look, man, Henry Highland Garnett said, because some people were in fear saying, well, if you advocate that black men and women fight, that might affect us. In other words, the free blacks. They might come after free blacks. So some of them was looking out for their own skin. They said, wait, if slaves start fighting, then any black person they see,
Now,
they might shoot.
Sound familiar?
Right, now that sounds familiar?
Yeah, of course.
Right, you know, you want
Look at-
black militants to fight all your battles,
Yeah.
but you don't want the white man just indiscriminately coming outside, hitting everything that he sees, just shooting. You know, so in any event, Fred Douglass was spectacular as usual in his weighing in on what to do with respect to slavery. So it went to a vote. You know, there comes a time where the delegates have to vote. So they voted. Do you know that those who were supportive of Henry Highland Garnett, do you know that they lost by one vote? One vote. One vote. With all those delegates from all over the country, and Fred Douglass, as usual, was just so strong because he had that mindset. It's almost like a double consciousness where he feels something has to be done because he was against slavery. I mean, he was one that escaped from slavery. His wife helped him escape from slavery, and so, you know, he was against the institution. But he had a problem with the way they wanted to resolve it. And he spoke out against that, and in speaking out against it, he was able to overturn the vote. Now, Henry Highland Garnett said to our people and said, look, where do you go? He said, how can it be any worse than it is right now? So he definitely affected the room. Because he said, how can it be any worse? This is a reverend speaking. He said, how can it be any worse than it is right now? So fight. Well, that's not what they decided on doing. By one vote they lost. Fred Douglass not only was against it, but he wanted them to put into the resolution, he wanted to put in the resolution the word Christian. Now, so I gotta ask you, why would Fred Douglass, having won the decision, but now still wanted them to put in the language on this thing? He wanted to put the word Christian.
Because the vote was so slim.
Say it again, brother.
The vote was so slim.
Say it a little louder so that
Because the vote was so slim.
The vote was so slim.
the vote, it was so close a vote that he wanted to make sure that from here on in, it is now a part of your Christian duty to fight peaceably without force. So he wanted that in the language, that now you can't ever again come with a resolution around fighting by any means necessary. That would no longer be a part of the thing. So they voted for that, but they wouldn't put the word Christian in.
Good.
But he won that it was decided that that resolution would be indefinite. And that it would never have to come up again. In other words, you can't raise that again. Throughout perpetuity, you can't come to this convention and say, I recommend that armed struggle is the way to free yourself.
That's just that.
So that's why Fred wanted to put Christian in, because Fred understood literally everybody here is Christian. Everybody here belongs to a church. So let's make this part of your Christian code of ethics. that nobody ever comes in here again and talk about using guns or weapons against white people. But they went far with him. In other words, they won battle, won vote, but they refused to put the word Christian in there, making that a part of your Christian duty, because that would have been too much. But Fred recommended that, for the record. So if you look up Fred's activity at that 1843 meeting, Fred did that. And we need to know that. So he wanted that to be a part of a Christian code. But the words of Henry Highland Garnett to this day loom large. He said, you can't be in a worse condition than you're in right now. And he was so right. And if we had told, in other words, he reminded people that why all the prior conventions did we have to have white people permission? That this was the first one they had that no white people were there. Can you imagine that? That white supervision was required at these conventions prior to that. And he spanked everybody there by letting them know that y'all finally got around to having something without white supervision. And now you have people pleading their cause. You know? Now we got people that continue along that vein and still, to this day, in that vein of thinking, to this day. Why are y'all doing this? Why does UAM have meetings with no whites there? Do you know there were some people in the United African Movement that didn't like that? They wanted white people to be there. They wanted to be able to see that, say the next day, oh, I sat next to a white person and they weren't in agreement. Oh no, there's some John Browns out here. Sure they are. Sure they are. You know, so yeah, sure you're right. So, and I know some brothers that couldn't bring their white girlfriends there. This one of them. They couldn't bring their white girlfriends there, and it became an issue. And one brother I'm thinking of in particular, who I won't say his name because some of y'all know, but he left and came back once in a blue moon because he couldn't bring his white girlfriend there. And he even asked, why not? What's the problem? And but I won't say his name. And no, he's not here today. He's not here today. But no, I'm talking about United African Movement. Ultimatic. So that organization, you know, they don't allow white people in, and that upsets some people.
I left my white woman in the car.
You know, she had to stand outside on Fulton Street for 3 hours, from 7 o'clock maybe to 11 some nights. You know, wait. If she waited in the car standing up, that's a long time. So that happened. So you know that's an age-old argument that went on for over a century or a century and a half, even after that. You know, that kind of stuff. So Fred did what he did, and obviously in history he's looked at favorably for the most part in history. Now there's some people obviously that have a whole lot of question marks about Fred.
Absolutely. He wonders why he's promoting so much.
You know, it's no secret, if you really know Fred Douglass, it's no secret why he did some of the things that he did. But, and you know, later on, not 1843, but years later, people understood that better. And even the young leadership began by then to reject Frederick Douglass. But in terms of speaking ability, you can't find anybody that can speak better than Fred Douglass. And he did not have a formal education. But he was gifted, God blessed him with that ability to speak like no other. I'd even say that if you put his speeches against people today, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody that can speak better than Fred Douglass. In my opinion,
On every,
I'd say that Minister Louis Farrakhan is probably the best speaker that I've heard. I'd say that. It's subjective. Obviously, you might have your favorites, I might have mine. But the best I've ever heard is Minister Louis Farrakhan, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. His speeches. He can hold you in a seat for 2-3 hours easy. Hold you there and really, without a note in front of him, just go. And he's done that over the last 50 years, more longer than that actually. If you know, he was in the nation since the mid-50s. And for him to be still on the scene today and still can speak this much later, it speaks to that man's ability. But you know, in terms of preachers, I'd say F.D. Washington, in terms of preachers, probably can set you on fire, set you ablaze like no other. And Huey Rogers, people like that, you know, obviously F.D. Washington is no longer with us. And, Huey Rogers is really up in years now, but I'm just saying, they set a tone among black preachers.
what about that preacher that was doing the church before King came? What was his name? Did you mention him?
Yes.
I'm gonna get into that. I'm gonna mention that. But I'm just saying that. So Fred had his day in the sun, and obviously that convention, which was 18 years before the Civil War actually broke out, their position, official position, was not to take up arms against white America. And that's ultimately how it went. And there was no follow-up resolution after that. That was it in terms of that type of meeting and that type of decision making. Now, when you look back at history, I think most people in this room would say Henry Highland Garnett was right. Is that so?
Yes, sir.
That they should have taken up arms?
Maybe
Now,
because
is there anybody that feels
did we
that?
have arms to take up?
Well, is there anybody that says that
That was
Fred
the purpose.
Douglass was right?
But that was the purpose. You made a good point.
What's the point?
The point, someone made the question that did we have, he made the question, do we have arms? She said we would have took theirs.
No way.
Oh, well, you could take theirs on the plantation. In other words, if you strategize on the plantation, you can take those few guns. It's not like they had fully automatic weapons. They only shoot one time, you know, for the most part, or a shotgun 2 times, whatever. But I would say that you can take their weapons on a plantation, because you're talking about some plantations that had hundreds. So I'm not saying that, in other words, I'm not saying nobody will get killed in that process. I'm not saying that. But if you were a slave, what do you care if a few people die? All that's in front of you is your freedom. So what if somebody died to take a weapon? The weapon is gonna be taken, but now you have to deal with militias. You have to deal with a formal army. So they had formal troops in South Carolina and Mississippi. They had, all sorts of groups, but you could take it from the slave master. That's the point. Now the armed militias are going to be more organized. They're going to be obviously more prepared for battle, and they're going to have more weapons. So that's a consideration, and I'm sure that was a part of the discussion.
Absolutely, Garnett's.
Right. But he felt that you can't make your position any worse. And Garnett was right. And it's easily to agree with him now, but just imagine how hard it was then. But they only lost by one vote to organize, and they would have organized a minimum of 50,000 soldiers who was going to head south and cut heads off along the way. Just blaze southward and take all the heads, take every weapon, and just keep going. Keep going south, which was the plan. And, but, you had, it was a tight vote, but they lost by one vote. Now, like I said, Fred Douglass had a lot to do with it. Now, I know, Ray, you mentioned something that I'm going to get to. I forgot what you mentioned, but I'm sure I'm going to
Preacher that was, the church that King took over.
Yeah, okay. Okay, that's all you needed to say. Now, Dr. Ossian Sweet is a situation that happened in Detroit. Now, this was in 1925, so this is years after slavery. Dr. Ossian Sweet was a physician. He bought a nice middle-class house in 1925 in a suburb of Detroit. Suburb was all white, middle class, and they weren't going to allow a black person to integrate their area. So what they did was, from the outset, they broke all of his windows and threatened him with death.
Sound familiar?
Didn't that happen to Bill Russell?
Yeah.
Happened to Reggie Miller.
Reggie Miller?
Burnt his house down.
That's correct. And in the part of
Magic Johnson played center.
now, didn't they
His wife
vandalize LeBron's house?
Yeah.
He bought a house where? Was it Brentwood or what's that other part of Hollywood? It was Brentwood, or it was the other part of LA, that other very expensive part.
Not Bel Air.
Yeah, it was either Brentwood or Bel Air. And they vandalized his house. So that's happened before. But we're talking about literally 100 years ago. In 1925 Detroit. And if you think there's violence and hatred in the Deep South, you ain't seen nothing till you see it in the Midwest. Even Dr. King, when they ran him out of Illinois, he said, man, he thought he saw everything in the South. He didn't see nothing like the Midwest.
Came up north.
So, well, Dr. Sweet organized the brothers in the church to be in his house with 2 of his siblings. And 7 brothers spent the night in his house because white folks told him that they was going to get him. Now, since he was a doctor, only because he was a doctor, there was a police line down the block. They put a police line there to prevent the Ku Klux Klan from getting into the house. And they had a line for a day or more, day or two, but in that process, white people was mad. That mob, by the second day, just crashed through the line and came out blazing and started shooting into the house. Now, we're not talking about in the backwoods of Alabama or Mississippi. We're talking about Detroit. So they started shooting. And guess what the brothers in the church did? Somebody say it like with all. They shot back.
Two-way fly.
Amen.
Shot back. That's what the church did.
Church. Big up to the church.
That's what they did.
Hallelujah.
His 2 brothers and 7 other brothers and himself started shooting back. Guess what? They killed 1 white man and wounded another in that process. Now, who did the district attorney charge? Everybody in that house, including Dr. Sweet's wife, was charged with murder. So his 2 brothers, the 7 brothers from the church, they came by for a church meeting. Now, they just coincidentally had guns with them. But they went to that house to pray. He said, pray and meet at my house tonight, and they came to it, which is what a church is supposed to do. Pray, fast, devotion, all that good stuff that we talk about what the church does. Fellowship. You know, you meet, you exhibit that good conduct. That's what they did.
Absolutely.
And in that process, 1 man fell. And another one was wounded. The district attorney charged everybody in that house with murder. Well,
Not self-defense.
no self-defense. Did that happen before?
Yeah.
And can anybody name a situation where that happened before? Or that happened recently?
That guy, John White, when you guys were over there.
Absolutely. Say it again, brother.
John White, when they came to his house and said they're gonna rape his wife and kill his son.
And kill his son. With John White in Long Island.
Recently?
No, it's about.
It happened a few years ago.
That's recently.
Yeah, it happened in the last decade ago.
That we know about.
Yeah, the ones we know about. We can only talk about what we know about. So we ain't making stuff up here. So that happened with John White. Here you got about 7 white guys surrounding his house, telling him, open up the door because we're gonna rape your wife and kill your son. Now, this one white young man thought that he was
Gangster.
Moses Powell.
Superman.
This white guy thought he was Moses Powell. See, I'd rather say that because y'all gonna say Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan. The baddest was Moses. Just sorry to tell you, if y'all upset, don't be upset with
George
me.
Cofield.
Check with people that know.
Serious.
They ain't say Moses bad. Moses close enough, he'd take a gun right out your hand and slap the stuffing out of you. You know, but I'll just say for y'all that are more comfortable with it. The white guy thought he was Jackie Chan. How's that? That's better?
Thank you.
thought he was Jackie Chan. He thought he could take the gun out of John White's hand,
Something like to jest.
and he ended up shooting himself. John White didn't shoot. He ended up shooting himself. So in other words, this has happened before. The district attorney charged John White with murder. In this Ossie and Sweet trial, they charged everybody in the house, including his wife, who was just there because it was her house. So in that trial, to make a long story short, the all-white jury could not come to a conclusion. So there was a mistrial, the first mistrial. They retried the case again, but this time the prosecution decided to go with them one at a time. In other words, if we try to charge everybody, including the wife, even that all-white jury, when the case was presented, said, "No, we can't put everybody in jail if they came to his house." So the prosecution decided, well, we're going to go after them one at a time. Maybe that's better. So they went after his youngest brother first. Dr. Ossie and Sweet's younger brother, they went after him. And he won the case. And after he won the case, you know what the prosecution said?
Forget it. Pissed off.
Forget it. Can't win. So they dropped the charges on everybody. So here, you have a case in 1925.
That's deep.
Black folks winning. Most people wouldn't even try. And I like the fact that all them brothers was church brothers. All of them. But they didn't mind packing heat. And they didn't mind returning fire. It was nothing written that God would not be with them. God is always with you if you're the righteous. Scripture said God is wicked, angry with the wicked every day. He's bent his bow and made it ready. So in other words, who is God with? The oppressed. He's with those that are in the right, not the wicked.
Absolutely.
You know, as a matter of fact, I'll just tell you, and I even scribbled it down just so I won't mess it up. I scribbled this down. I don't know if I put it in my notes. I think I did. Yeah, I put the 27th Psalm that I used to, whenever, 100 blacks, whenever we were involved in certain things that were dangerous, and I would always say, think of this passage of Scripture. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked, even my enemies and my foes, come upon me to eat my flesh, they stumble and fall. Though a host shall encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war shall rise against me, in this will I be confident. And this is what Dr. Ossie and Sweet did. They were confident in battle. And they won, and one of the opposition fell. The scripture said they will stumble and fall.
Absolutely.
He stumbled and fall, and he didn't get up. That's where it's at.
That's it.
And they won in court, in a court with all white jury.
Deep.
So I'm just saying that, and that's in 1925. 1925. Now you gotta remember, even to this day, so 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you know what black folks used to say to each other if you had a prominent job or you was a lawyer? Who's your what? That's close. Who's your rabbi? Because everybody had one. You know, everybody, if you was in the civil rights movement, if you was in business, if you were politically active, everybody had a rabbi. And yet, why would we need a rabbi if in 1925 we was winning cases? Why would we have to have a rabbi if somebody mentioned, what's her name? What's her name who the Fox? I got, what's her name? Ida B. Wells? Ida B. Wells. She won. Even, it's just so many cases. But I wanna keep going.
Celia Slade, she won a case.
Yeah, she won. And they had, back then, they had a few, not a lot, but they had a few what was called slave courts. Where depending on the treatment or depending what, if the master, the slave master was taking raping you or things like that, or beating you or doing certain things, you can go to those courts. But that's the, they call it the sweet trial, or the Dr. Ossie's sweet trial.
How did this brother get away? How did his brother do that back in 1925? What did he say? What was it?
Okay, they had a team of lawyers. The NAACP was involved. They were able to recruit and bring some Jewish attorneys from New York, because you know you have to remember the South back then, we didn't have black attorneys. There was hardly any. If you was lucky to find one in the whole state. So back then it wasn't in the few black attorneys that we did have, most of them was in places like Atlanta, even back then. So you didn't have many black attorneys, but you know, it took some time to develop it,
And this is like.
which Charles Harrington Houston was able to do. So in any event, but Dr. Street wanted to try, but to answer your question, among those attorneys was Clarence Darrow. I don't know if anybody's heard of him. Clarence Darrow was a famous white attorney, one of the best ever. He was a defense attorney, and he was a part of that team. So Dr. Ossie and Sweet was successful in winning a case where a white man was killed by black brothers in the church. So, and that's good that you asked that, because I would have forgot to mention that Clarence Darrow was on that team. And NAACP raised the funds for that case. You know, they did a lot of fundraising and was able to put together a strong team that won. And once the prosecution saw that they was up against competent lawyers in that case, they just threw in the towel in that particular case. Now, has anybody heard of the kissing case? Has anybody heard of the kissing case? Now, in this case, unlike the Dr. Ossie and Sweet trial, in this particular case, the NAACP would not touch this. The national NAACP, the national branch, let me say that right. The national branch of the NAACP wouldn't kill it, wouldn't touch this trial. Now, what happened was, there was about a 7 or 8 year old girl who used to play with, years ago, a black child who was her age, 7 or 8, and the other boy was about 7. She saw them a year or 2 later. Now they had played together several years ago. So when she saw them, they were at like a school setting. She saw them, you know what she did? She ran up to them and she kissed them on the cheek.
Like any kid would.
Like any kid would. 7 or 8-year-old girl, she kissed the little boy, the black. She's white. She's white. She kissed a black boy on the cheek, and then she kissed another little black boy that she recognized on the cheek. She kissed them both. There was no issue at school. None. The issue started when she went home that night. When she went home later that day, she told her mother, oh, guess who I saw? I saw so-and-so and so-and-so. Now, the mother don't remember their names. But she told her mother that she kissed them. 2 little boys. She said she kissed them. You know what the mother did? The mother washed her mouth out with lies. Now, some people might not know what lies in the days. Back then,
What year was it? What year?
this was in 1958. This was in 1958 in Monroe, North Carolina.
I was just born.
That's Monroe, North Carolina. As a matter of fact, if you're not familiar with Monroe, it's right next door to Charlotte. So I know people will know what Charlotte is. Monroe is like being right here in Bed-Stuy, and if you keep going west, you in Clinton Hill and don't even know it.
Wow. Yeah.
And now you're downtown Brooklyn. So you can't even really draw the line unless you're familiar with the area. When you leave in Monroe and when you hit in Charlotte, it's right next to each other. Well, this is where it happened that her mother, after washing her mouth out with lye, called the police department and demanded that the 2 little boys be charged with rape. Not kissing, not fondling, nothing like that. Rape. Straight up rape. Her daughter never said she was raped. Never talked about anybody getting in her pants. She said she kissed them. She didn't say they kissed her. So in any event,
The medical burns.
now,
That's great.
well, you know,
That's equivalent. What is equivalent?
well, if that happened, who should get charged with that? The boys? The mother? So in any event, when her father got home and she told the father, he got him and his boys together, they grabbed their shotgun and they went out looking for the 2 little boys. Now the police found them first, rounded them up and got them into precinct before the father found them, because the father was going to kill both. You know, him and his friends, his neighbors. And the Ku Klux Klan, I don't know if the father was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, but suffice it to say that that was a strong branch of the KKK there. Because they had a meeting shortly after that about this. And you know how many members were there? 7,000.
Whoa.
7,000 at one meeting.
In 1958.
That time it was serious now.
Yeah, now, and today, it's fashionable and easy to be a civil rights leader. Not in the 50s. Not in North Carolina. Georgia, Mississippi, places like that. That's where they was killing black leaders.
He was clear on that, right? He was clear.
So, yeah, well, they still do it now. I mean, they killed Darren Seals and all the young leaders in Ferguson. So, in any event, the police arrested them. Do you know that these two little children did not even get to see their parents for 6 days? 6 days they were locked up without legal counsel, without family. Because you said Central Park, you're getting ahead of it. You're getting ahead of it. But that's good that you can recognize the parallel. That when certain things happen, the rule of law is thrown out. White folks don't respect the law. You think they do when they impose it on you. They have no respect for the law.
No.
So in this particular case, the governor was Hodges. His name was Hodges. He huddled with the attorney general, the state attorney general. They locked those boys up. The police beat the hell out of them. Every day, trying to extract a confession from two little boys that don't know what they did or what kind of mess they was in.
Nothing for nothing.
Beating the hell out of them. As a matter of fact, even when they was beating them so bad that when the parents finally, after 6 days, were able to see the children, they were able to, a photographer snuck a shot of the children and was able to see how badly they were beaten. And they got that picture out. That picture went all over the country. It went all over the world, it went global. In Europe, they were having meetings, white folks, over, did you hear about these two little boys? And who was the person? Well, yeah. Well, this was around the same time, a couple of years apart, 3 years apart from Emmett Till 1955. This is 58, so 3 years. Do you know that? And now, this is why I'm asking you about the black church all over the country. What do you do now? What type of position are you going to take? Now, I told you that the NAACP national, it wouldn't touch it.
They give a reason?
What's that?
Did they give a reason for not getting involved?
No, NAACP don't have to give you no reason. They weren't involved, but they didn't fight the Monroe branch of the NAACP
But they allowed
that
those-
was involved. Who was in that, I'm gonna give you a second to think about it. Who was in that, who was up in that branch at that time?
Marshall.
Who?
Thurgood Marshall.
No. Does anybody know who was the local president of that branch at the time that took that fight on?
You boys?
No. No. Does anybody? No, because no, it wasn't the board.
What's the name of that reverend, that Thornton guy? I can't remember his name.
Initial, please.
Initials? R&W.
I say one look.
No. No. Robert Williams. Robert F. Williams. Not rifles, Negro with guns.
Oh.
Robert Williams was involved with that. He was a Marine veteran. So he was about it. And he was serious about his business. And he was not going to stand by, irrespective of what the national branch of the NAACP was doing. He was not going to allow two 7-year-old children to be in jail for doing nothing.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And they being beaten repeatedly. But they can't confess to something because they don't know what they're confessing to. And it would be illegal, obviously, to elicit a confession out of a little 7-year-old boy without the advice of counsel.
For children.
But all those rules went out of the window, and as I said, the governor and the state attorney general put it on lockdown.
You want to continue or you want to stop?
No, I want to continue. I want to continue for a little. So what happened? Who was the y'all gotta get some of these, and I'm asking y'all some questions. Y'all can ask me questions later. Who was that? Who was the y'all? This is easy. This is easy. Who was the first lady that from time to time that would get involved with things going on in the black community?
Eleanor Roosevelt.
Say it again.
Eleanor Roosevelt.
A little louder.
Eleanor Roosevelt.
Eleanor Roosevelt. Do you know Eleanor Roosevelt got involved in this? Her husband had been dead. Her husband died at 44. This is 58. So 14 years later, after her husband's gone, but she's a part of the family now, that, you know, she got involved. NAACP wouldn't touch it. This is some real serious business. Wow. Eleanor Roosevelt got involved and went down there and spoke to the governor and the state attorney general's office, saying, you gotta let those two little boys go. They ain't do nothing. Come on. Thank you. Governor said no. I understand what you're saying. No, we'll talk later and all that. Said no. So now it's global. In London, they having serious meetings about it, saying, how can you in America allow this? So when it got that bad, the governor, without explanation or apology, let them go. That next year, 59. This happened in 58. In 59, the governor, whether he was embarrassed or not, I don't know whether he was embarrassed or not. But one thing that he didn't do is apologize. Yes.
How long were those children kept?
They were kept for months. I'd say, 5-6 months. So if this happened in October, it happened early the next year, and like I said, the only reason why the governor let them go, now they were sentenced. Did I tell you they were sentenced? No, right? They were sentenced. They were children, but they still ran them
How do
through
you
court.
do that? They're not even adults.
They ran them to court,
Are they still alive?
and they were sentenced to stay in jail until they're 21 years
Oh,
old.
that's crazy.
Now this is North Carolina for you.
What-
They were told that they would be in jail
Until they were 21,
until they were 21.
14 years.
Only because the pressure mounted all over the world that the governor had to let them go. So the governor said, damn it, I'm going to let them go, but I'm not apologizing and I'm not giving anybody an explanation.
All right. What do they have for names?
The children?
Yeah.
Tyrone and Darnell. What difference?
No.
Okay.
No. He's right.
I know.
Their names were, okay, the little girl who just told her mother what happened, who was innocent in this. She just was telling her mother she was excited
She didn't
to see
like
somebody
mom.
she had seen. The little girl's name was Sissy Marcus.
What?
Sissy.
Sissy?
S-I-S-S-Y. Sissy Marcus is the little girl's name, and the little boy's name were James Thompson and David Simpson. And as I said, the governor's name was Governor Hodges. Governor Hodges.
HODGS.
Oh. wow.
Okay, can we just forget about the kids for a minute and ask, what happened to the girl with the mouth thing? I mean,
Sissy
no
Moore.
one was seeing her condition and asking how she got here. I mean,
Nothing was wrong with her.
The lie
The lie?
didn't affect her.
I guess it was probably, you know, like lye soap. You probably just,
oh,
Oh, yeah.
you know, the lye soap will take oil and paint and all that stuff. But you know, it won't kill you. It's not gonna go on the throat, burn the throat. It's a thing that's called the lye soap.
oh,
Oh, like, yeah.
It was lye soap.
That's that brown soap.
No, I meant lye soap. I'm sorry.
That's that brown soap.
okay.
Mark, you wanna say?
Yeah, now I gotta correct my notes here.
You know, like
I thought it was.
you know, like back then when you were little, they had Octagon soap.
That brown soap.
Yeah.
That brown soap that
Oh, man.
take anything off. You know,
Boys,
yeah.
down some.
They watch you
You know, back then we used to use scrub boards.
Scrub boards, wash clothes.
Yeah, to wash clothes with. You take that Octagon soap, it take anything out. Stains,
Yeah.
it take anything out. You know, I
This
can
was
go.
what year was this, 19 what?
58.
That soap was strong, man. You can believe that.
So that was in North Carolina.
They
So,
still use it on the rock.
Then, right, those boys?
That's rock soap.
Rackers
yeah,
out.
yeah, they could be alive now.
Maybe in the
I'm sure.
60s.
Octagon,
Yeah.
Big beats.
So, okay, I told you that the governor's name was Hodges, so, okay, you have that. So I gave you 2 names of the 2 little boys. And I told you that, the person who was involved, was, Robert F. Williams, who obviously became more famous later, Negroes with Guns and a whole lot of other things he was involved in, had to leave the country and all that. But this is where he was really getting his feet wet.
Well, this is crazy, man.
In this, and
Why is that crazy?
Well, because,
it is
when you
crazy.
think about it,
And you have to remember that he even did things like fighting for access to a pool. The white people in Monroe had a pool for white children. There was no pool for black children in Monroe. So he demanded equal time for black children. And they said no. And he said, no, you can't do that because black people pay taxes too. So if they paying taxes and white people pay taxes, white people can use the pool and we can use the pool. So they actually got fed up with Robert Williams and what was his partner, the vice president, his name, because he was a doctor, the vice president was a doctor, his name was Dr. Albert E. Perry. So after that 7,000 had that meeting, they went to his house and shot up his house. You know, they were looking for him and he wasn't there. So, you know, when you juxtapose that with today's civil rights leader, ain't nobody on top of their head busting them in the head or shooting them. They're all millionaires.
yeah.
All the top leaders of all the traditional civil rights organizations and all now leaders. You know, whether it's Jesse Sharpton or these other guys, they're all millionaires 10, 20 times over, living the good life, you know, picking and choosing here and there, cherry pick, take a little course here and there, but the agreement's already hooked up with the white people that you're supposed to be fighting. Now, white people don't build you up to tear down their house. So if a person like Sharpton's on TV 5, 6 times a week, they're not building you up if you fighting them. You know, you actually on the team. You know, they don't eat themselves. That's not gonna happen. They don't make mistakes like that and eat themselves. They might give a brother, allow him to get a PhD, allow an Alton-Maddox to become an attorney, not knowing full well that all the weapons and accoutrements of a legal system, Alton gonna use that and beat you down every time. But they make mistakes that way. But to put you on TV every day in front of them after you've shown who you truly are. No, white folks don't make mistakes. They don't do that. So when you see a person making all these millions of dollars, that they give it. They have several fundraisers that they do every year, NAACP, Rainbow Coalition, National Action Network, and these white folks buy $100,000 tapes. And they all lay that money on it. These guys become rich. They have different ways that they funnel them the money. But all of them live the good life. They live the high good. They have an avarice lifestyle, and it's satisfied yield. And these guys do real well with it. So in that case, with the kissing case, there was no explanation given, like I said. They just let him go because they had to. And the governor never did any time during his lifetime ever apologize for that. And like I said, no explanation, no apology. And that's the way that case ended. And them kids who were victimized, it was just a tragedy. I mean, I think when they killed Stenny, was the youngest person ever killed, execution style. Stenny was what, 13, 14 years old, was the youngest person ever killed with an electric chair.
In
for
South
something
Carolina,
that-
right?
What's that?
Was we in South Carolina?
It was the South. Was it South Carolina? I forgot right now. But just look up
He was 15.
Stenny. He was 14 or 15.
Yeah, 15.
What was his name?
Stinney. George Stinney.
George Stenny. George Stenny.
Spell the last name?
Stinney.
Stinney. That should be it. So you know, there's a history there, and I think Rajin was the one who compared that to. I think you compared it to Emmett Till.
No, Central Park.
Oh, Central Park.
There's another brother that's in jail now for 12 years for kissing a girl. It was happened in 2019.
Did he kiss her or she kissed him?
He kissed her,
Okay.
but he
Okay.
got locked up. But they were friends.
Right. But in this case, the little girl kissed them.
I know, and it's
So he talking about 2019.
Yeah. Well, look. How long ago was the Central Park job case?
Absolutely.
How long ago was that? 89. 89. So you're talking about a few decades ago, a generation and a half ago. If a generation is 20 years, a generation and a half ago, Central Park. They threw out all the rules, didn't they?
Absolutely.
They took boys who was just in the park and accused them of a crime that they didn't do. And in accusing them, they violated their rights and they did the good cop, bad cop stuff, railroaded these young boys. In other words, if I go to you and tell you, I know you didn't do it, but you saw so-and-so do it, I'm gonna let you out tonight. What did he do? Did you see him? Did you see him grab her arms? He grabbed her arms. I know you didn't do nothing, but you saw him grab her arms, right? Yeah. He grabbed her arms, right? Okay, we're gonna let you go in a little while, go in another room and say, yo, you didn't do anything, but didn't you see the legs grab? Didn't you see her legs grab? Yeah. Okay. And that's the way you go around the board. And nobody's confessing to anything, but you jamming up everybody.
In light of forensics.
In that process.
In light of forensics.
Right. Well, look. Now I'm glad he said that. He said in light, he meant in lieu of forensics. In other words, what are we saying here? In other words, if science can confirm they were in the park and that they did it, guess what? We use it. But what if science shows they have nothing to do with it?
That's the time it's still.
So you dismiss it. You say we ain't using science, damn it. We're gonna use human intelligence. We're not gonna use science. If, in other words, the white man will use science if it helps. If it doesn't help, whatever his particular agenda is, you dismiss it. In other words, you have no respect for the Lord. You don't respect any other power other than yours. And that's what they did in Central Park. Even when the white guy, the Latino youngster
Matos.
came forward.
Matos.
Yeah. Even when he
And
came
he's a
forward
serial rapist.
and said that he did it. And was able to point out things that wasn't in the press. Only things that the police department knew. He was able to lay it out. He was able to take them to the park and take you where he first accosted her and where he even dragged her, which was not known. He did all that.
And the DA hit this.
And guess what? The DA tried to fight it. What's her name? Stein? What's that? Feinstein.
Or letterer.
Feinstein, that's her name. Feinstein. Fought it. The detectives justified all the stuff they did. They violated the law left and right. But what does that prove if you go back to the Kissing case or other cases?
Or Trump.
All of that goes out the window. All of that goes out the window to prove your point. In other words, white people don't respect the law, but they'll use the law if it'll help put you away. But if it's not going to help put you away, dismiss the law.
And remember, Trump was a regulator in that too.
Now, Ray, you mentioned something, because I got too many notes and I'm not going to get to my notes and I'm going to do the Q&A today. What was the case you mentioned, Ray? I think you mentioned,
Reverend was that.
who was the reverend in
Prior.
prior to
Before
Dr.
King.
Martin Luther King?
Yeah, he
Jr.?
was a fire.
Now, here's what. You know why Ray is mentioning that? Because Ray remembers that person fought for a 15-year-old girl who was raped. This 15-year-old girl was raped by a white man that she identified. The police department refused to arrest this person. Not only was she able to identify him by name, she also told the police where this person lived. They refused to arrest this person. He was middle class, he come from a well-to-do white family. So
That was a no.
we can touch that too during the Q&A, because I'm gonna stop right after this. Now, in this particular case, you had a reverend. She came to Reverend Vernon Jones. Imagine that. A 15-year-old girl goes to Reverend John and says, so-and-so raped me. What is a black man supposed to do? Even in a situation where rape was permissible by white men over black women. This is in Alabama. Montgomery. It was permissible. I know you're saying, rape is not permissible. And you just ignorant to those times. It was permissible. Well, she goes to Reverend John. Now, if you don't know, he was the reverend who was at Dexter before Dr. King. That church told him, leave it alone. Okay, I know somebody didn't hear.
It wasn't with it.
The church said, Pastor, leave it alone. It's already happened. It's too late.
But your question says, what are you supposed to do? You see, that's the
What
same
are you-
thing
right.
with
man supposed to do? And I'm not talking about just any black man. I'm talking about a black man who's been called to preach by God. God is your pastor. God has missioned you to pastor over black people. God has mandated that you stand for truth, justice, equality,
American way.
and manhood. Part of being a pastor is being a man.
Despite yourself.
You got to show leadership. Well, he had the option. Should he fight for this 15-year-old girl, or should he do what the church told him to do? The church told him, leave this situation alone. It's already happened. It's too late. She was raped already. She's still alive. Leave it alone. He went to church that Sunday and preached a sermon that infuriated the whole church. He said, look at you. He said, look at you. Look at all these men standing in this church idly, telling me to leave this alone. He said, look at some of you sisters in here, calling my wife, telling my wife to tell me to leave this alone, not make this an issue. He said, you coming between me and my wife. That's family business. He said, what the hell is wrong with you?
His name,
Call
Michael.
my wife to try to get my wife to convince me.
His
He said,
name,
this is a 15-year-old girl.
his name was George Steeney. October 21st, he was wrongfully convicted, legally executed by South Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the young
Right.
kid,
It was Steeney. It was in South
Steeney,
Carolina.
yeah, South
So
Carolina.
in any event, we're talking about a situation where a decision had to be made. He embarrassed the church so bad, you know what they did?
Fire.
They fired him.
I would have too.
They said, you won't let it go? We told you to let it go. He went to the police department with the little girl and said, I'm demanding you to go to such and such address and pick up such and such young man. His name is so-and-so, and he raped this little girl. We have her statement. Lock them up. The police, or we'll see. We got to talk to this supervisor. We'll get back to you. And they told the church, and the church in turn asked him several times to let this thing go. He wouldn't let it go. They fired him.
Left them out there.
They fired him, and he had to leave the state. He went on. And shortly after that, they hired a young pastor, somebody very young, just out of graduate school, just got his PhD, somebody young that came from a church background, a conservative background. His father was a preacher. His father's father was a preacher. So they felt this is not somebody wild, untamed, that's going to buck the system. Somebody that they could control. Young, 25, 26 max, I think about 25. Had all those degrees, fine young man, handsome, had a wife already, so I didn't have to worry about him. Running through Montgomery, had a nice fine wife, settled. They said, this is the candidate, this is who we need. And of course, later on, he shook up the world, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But they picked somebody they thought they could control. But he got so popular with what he was doing in that town that they couldn't fire him. But they fired a black man who was standing for them. And that's Vernon Jones. Vernon Jones. What happened to the little girl? She did not get justice. It never reach the court. And that's the way things were then. And if you think things have changed, look at Tawana Brody. She was raped by 6 white men, of whom she could identify. The identification proved to be true. One of the same guys that gave her, what's the name of that?
Chlamydia.
Say it?
Chlamydia.
Chlamydia. The guy who gave her chlamydia had it himself. The wife was stunned when she found out that's why he wasn't doing that to her. Because he had chlamydia. And that was proven. Even the mailman who delivered the mail that saw the abduction and gave a description, gave 3 out of the 6 characters of the license plate. He did that, but ultimately had to move from that area. That's a KKK area up there. And he had to move. So he took a federal job. You know, you can go anywhere over the country, so he transferred somewhere out there in the Midwest. He left New York.
So
Now, we didn't find out until the defamation trial that Automatics asked him, why didn't you tell them in the courtroom that you saw the abduction? You won't believe what he said. He said in the grand jury, they never asked me. He said all they asked me was, do I deliver mail at this address? Do you recognize Tawana Brody's address and all that stuff? He answered all the questions. Imagine you being a very important witness to an abduction, but when they get you in the courtroom, they talk about the weather. Yo, did you hear the Yankees won last night? And everything but the actual information. That's what you call a kangaroo court, where they don't want pertinent information to come out. But I'll stop at that point. So I'm just comparing to show you how Tawana Brody's connected with the whole history.
the guy who committed suicide, is there any information on
He did not commit suicide.
And murder.
He was a
Jeffrey
police officer.
Epstein then.
He was a police officer. He was a police officer that his assignment was actually to kill Tawana Brody. I don't know if it was as a police officer or as a man. He could not bring himself to killing her. So he was the one that dumped her in a garbage bin. He dumped her in a garbage bin. Yeah. But he could not bring himself to kill her. So he dumped her in the garbage bin with the understanding that the garbage truck in a few hours was coming while she was out cold in the garbage, laying there, that it would just back up, and you know those things like hook to it, and the garbage thing just dumps it right into the garbage. And so he did it like that because he couldn't shoot her. So he left it like that, and so what happened was she crawled, as God would have it, she crawled out in time before the garbage truck got there. So when Pagonis, who thought that it's all over, she gone, he asked, he went to the precinct, and he's a lawyer now, he's an ADA. He's an assistant district attorney. And he asked by accident, yo, did y'all have any reports on a little girl being, that's dead? Anything like that? And they said, no, what are you talking about? He said, oh, never mind, and he left. Now, later on, he went to the police officer's house and cursed him out and threatened him because his family is got mob ties. So he threatened the police officer. The police officer told him straight up, I'll blow your MF head off. If you ever get in my face again, who you think you are? And so, so he actually told the police just in case. He told them off the record unofficially that, yo, Harry Chris says such and such to me. You know, you need to know that. Just in case something jump over and you find me dead or something like that, Harry Chris, the police officer, threatened. But he actually was popping stuff to the police officer. And the police officer just could not bring himself to kill it to one brother. That's the whole point. And that's how that happened. But she was able to identify her rapist, the people who kidnapped her, and like I said, the mailman saw the abduction, and then a whole lot of other things to go with the case. But the proof, the facts are that it divided, even though it united the city, and there was a citywide movement, and out of that, the United African Movement was born. At the same time, people, that old white folks, and look, I can't even get into the snitch list. How many pastors, how many elected officials, how many business people and different people that are on that snitch list.
Another election.
That all came out, automatically was able to see the snitch list. And so many people that were involved, and many people got divided on that too. But now we can open it up for questions. Because
Okay, the first question is gonna be from the floor. Question?
come on with
The
it.
two boys,
Okay.
Go ahead.
the two young boys,
The two young boys.
do they exist? I mean, are they living today, or what year did they die? If they not,
I'm going to go with what the sister said earlier, given the fact that if we talking about a 58, so they were born in, let's say they were born in 51. If they were born in 1951, I'd say they're still alive.
They living.
Okay.
And no more than likely they're still alive.
Yeah.
If that's
But you know the history of that?
50 years
that's what
and
you
then
look up.
another 22 years, so they're in their early 70s.
Yeah.
So
They're in their early 70s.
so somebody gotta do the research, see if they still alive.
Right, I gave you their name.
Yeah, right.
So you can check and see.
Yeah,
what
What's
they're
all
doing.
this?
It was James Thompson and who else?
I would tell you that
Sissy
Mark
Marcus.
Simpson.
Well, Sissy, yes.
that's the little
The
girl.
little white girl that did it probably Quaker Miss. And then it was James Thompson she kissed and another one was.
Okay, so
Okay,
give the name so they can do the research
James
themselves.
Thompson, and the other little boy's name was David Simpson.
David Simpson, that's how he gets
Yes.
Okay, the next question. Anybody from our Zoom audience wants to ask a question? Anybody from the Zoom audience would like to ask a question? Going once, going twice, 3 times, that's a wrap. Okay, next question from the floor.
Yes.
So with the armed defense against the mob regarding in that case,
In Detroit?
yeah,
Okay.
what is the issue with African Americans and the Second Amendment where, how did that jump happen where we were defending ourselves at one point to becoming these, sort of advocates for gun control?
Let's look at it this way. There are changes that are made and that evolve over the years. The church was an institution where you could go there and get your winter coat if you didn't have one. If you didn't have adequate winter shoes or boots for the snow, which was forthcoming, the church was the place to go. The church would give a chicken dinner and raise money so you could send the children to a playland or a parking and have a outing, a cookout, what have you. The church was the place as we found out in Detroit and other places where if the Ku Klux Klan was coming to visit your house, the church was a place where the brotherhood was going to have a meeting at your house. If you say the Klan is coming to my house tonight, they say, well, brother, you know what? We're going to have church at your house tonight. And it just happenstance that they had their guns for it. But they, you know, that's the way the church used to be. Now, good luck with finding a church like that now. So a transition did happen. But there was a time where there was a seriousness about church, family, and unity, and fighting the black codes, fighting convict leasing, fighting all these barriers set up to destroy our families, fighting rape. The church used to fight against lynching. All these things that were important. These things were important. I know we don't think of that now. Do you know how important lynching was 100 years ago? Ever since 1865, it was paramount. Now it's about, I got to get a job, I got to get mine. You got yours, I got mine. You go from a serious institution that loved the Lord, that prayed, fasted, sacrificed, unified the community. It was the center. It was the epicenter of the community, was the church. Now, how did the church go from that to, in some situations, entertainment?
Tax breaks.
No, sir.
Integration.
I'm not giving them that. I'm not going to give them that. They ain't got nothing to do with no taxes. Here you supposed to be leading people, and now you hooping and hollering all day.
Integration.
Hey, integration. The black church still black.
It's black.
I'm not saying it ain't a white person or two in some churches. For the most part, the church is still black. Like Dr. King said it in the 60s. He said the most segregated time in America is on Sunday in church. Because the blacks worship here and the whites worship there. So when did this entertainment come in with the biggest preachers that got the mega churches and the ones that can hoop the best? And I'm not making a mockery of anybody that hoops. I'm not saying that anybody that's shouting, they not in the spirit, that is an act. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm just saying, how do you deliver a message that makes you the biggest? You got a mega church now. You got thousands and thousands of followers. Yet you can't lead. You can't lead. How do you somehow make LGBT a part of the black community? How do you make that a black issue where LGBT is the new black?
Disneyland, not the promise.
How the hell did that happen? How do now you marrying two men in a church? How do you bow down to a community that one day you a man, you mister, and then the next day you miss? And the church is supposed to adopt that? The scriptures are against that. Why don't you just be strong enough to say, I gotta go by the book says. If the book said a man's supposed to be a man and a woman is a woman, you ain't gotta make no excuse. You ain't gotta say there has to be room and this and that, LGBT this. How does every time you say black people need this and the LGBT, how does that even come into the picture?
On the floor.
Yes, sir.
What I'd like to say is that when I was with Sonny Carson, and we were organizing bones to take back down,
Repatriation.
we were having a meeting, and this gentleman, I'm not going to give you his name, and he simply went over the issue. He said, look at the size of my bicycle car. You know, he was telling us that money. You know, so. Like you
What
said,
about that pastor in Flatbush who allegedly was robbed? What was the final total? Because the number kept going up.
600,000.
Was it 400,000, 600,000? 600,000 was the number they came to in jewelry alone?
Yeah.
I think that was his boy said that.
And he said basically, and he's insured by the way, right? He was also insured with the diamonds and all that stuff. And he basically said that's how the church wanted to look.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so
But he said,
I'm gonna tell you something about Reverend Ike. Let me mention, since we dealing with the black church, and y'all not asking me that many questions.
No checks, only cash.
Let me just say, now Reverend Ike said that, you know, basic things like, you can't lose with the stuff I use.
Yeah.
Now, as a child listening to him, I thought, well, he's strictly hustling. The same way you see a cat in the drug game, in the pimp game, hustling. When I got a little older, but as a child, I said he hustled.
Yeah.
When I got a little older, I understood Reverend Ike much better. At one time, I thought, well, that's a hustle. But I didn't identify the hustle correctly. I thought he was trying to make money, but he said some powerful things in the process. I heard people say in church, oh, I got diabetes. I got sugar diabetes. That's what they call it. They don't say diabetes. In church, they say sugar diabetes. I got sugar. So I've heard people say, I got diabetes, my mother has diabetes, and my grandmother has diabetes. In other words,
Genetics.
it ain't no big thing. I got it. Reverend Ike said, it runs in your family, it's running out your family.
exactly.
And it's true.
Absolutely.
You can run it out your family. Reverend Ike said it ain't nothing magnanimous about being poor. There is nothing sanctimonious about not having money. Reverend Ike said that. Reverend Ike was right. It ain't nothing holy about having of just being broke, about being poor. It ain't nothing wrong with having some money. It ain't nothing wrong with having a roof over your head.
What a plane.
And he gave you a number that was guaranteed to come out within 10 days in the Handle, Old Way, Trotters, and Nitrites.
Boston,
So-
Massachusetts.
So, you know, Reverend Ike had some ways about him, but I'm just saying, in that process, he said, you know, he said things. In other words, Reverend Ike, now I'm not claiming that he's Amos Wilson now, don't get me wrong. Don't leave here saying that Mike was, you know, he was Amos Wilson. No, he wasn't no Amos Wilson. But he was working on your subconscious.
Yes, he said that.
Reverend Ike was working on your subconscious. He didn't want to hear those excuses. Oh, I'm so poor, I'm so tired, I'm so sick. He said, you thinking about being sick? That's why you're sick. He said, don't accept the disease. He's talking about have your mind right. Get that mind right. The Bible says, even when I'm weak,
Wait, I'm strong.
say that I'm strong.
Yeah.
You don't walk around moping on, man, I'm weak, man. Anybody can beat me. Just slap me. And I'm down, and I'm going to stay down. It's not what the Bible says. The Bible says I'm more than a conqueror. The Bible, in other words, I'm not just a conqueror, I'm more than a conqueror. I'm ready for battle. The minute I get up, I'm ready to battle.
That ain't gonna work with you, woman. You can't say, I know I'm only 3 inches, but I'm gonna pretend I'm 12. That ain't gonna happen, brother.
Well, so what I'm saying is that the Bible is right when it says, even when I'm weak, you at your lowest point, and you're weak, you feel downtrodden and weak and you can't get it done. The Bible says, say you strong.
Yeah, I can make it today.
Dr. King said it right. when he said, for a man to ride your back, you gotta be bent over. So straighten up your back. And stop bending over like that.
Is that to the LGBT?
Any other question from the floor? Any other question from the Zoom?
Hey, man. Man, no business.
So
Okay.
to the Zoom audience, let me say something to the Zoom audience. I'm sorry I offended y'all with that LGBT stuff. I lost y'all. I understand. It happens sometimes. Because most people, if they say anything along those lines, and I'm talking about let men lead men. Now, you won't find me out here
That's right.
persecuting anybody that believes in same sex. That's not me. I'm not going to abuse anybody because they
Just
believe
keep it
in
over
it.
there.
I'm just going to continue in the straight vein. I love the irritated gene. I'm going to say it again. I love the irritated gene. He believes in straight black pride. You clap for him. Straight black pride, all the way. You know, I've never seen him abuse anybody that's of that community. Now, there was a time when he did expose some people that was in that, but I understand it. You know, we go through different stages, and I understand when he outed some people. Now, I could out people than that. I can mention some well-known people tonight. I can do it right now. I told you that I live by that scripture, in whom shall I fear? You know, and even in this, I will be confident.
That's it.
Though a host might encamp around me,
Number
the
27.
scripture that says all that.
27.
Won't feel evil, but I mean, I could really give y'all some names of some big time pastors that rather switch than fight to do that. Well,
Don't go there.
I'm not going to do it tonight.
That's another lecture.
Yeah.
That's going to be another lecture, and that's only going to be if y'all are tricky enough to get the question. See, I remember when Aura, she was on a Zoom thing when I was talking about Dr. King. So I was trying to get through that Dr. King lecture without answering certain things because there was no need to. You could talk about Dr. King's life. It's so full of so many things that I shouldn't even mention it, but she asked me, and she was sly about it in court, by the way. She said, well, isn't it, I read somewhere something about Dr. King and a white girl. I said, all right, okay. She knew, and so she got me, I wanted to get through the lecture without talking about it. It's similar to how Malcolm tried to get through that lecture without mentioning what happened to Kennedy. And so that guy from the Times asked him a question at the end during the Q&A. But he got through the whole lecture without mentioning the recently killed president who died a day or so early. He got hit with the question during the Q&A, and Malcolm answered the question that opened up a can of worms. So when Aura asked about the white woman that Dr. King was seeing, I said, well, he was doing more than seeing her. He was, and he was
He was
engaged.
researching the culture that he was fighting.
And
Trying to unite.
so it was one of the things. So in any event,
I'm always researching.
the LGBT community has now infected so-called black system challenging positions where somehow you feel obligated to mention them. Now, they ain't mentioning you in anything they do.
Never.
But somehow, you're obligated to mention them. What struggle did they participate in to help you get any of your constitutional rights or anything else? Some of them stood in your way. But now, every black prominent leader, when you're on TV, you have to go down the line. African Americans, Latinos, and LGBT Asians. Hey, and even Asians, you got to mention that everybody hates them, even though they have a history of mistreatment to us. They killed Tasha Howells, a 15-year-old little girl. The white judge let her go after she shot in the back of the head. She did not steal that orange juice. Asians did that. The Asians that beat up the Caribbean grandmother on Church Avenue did that, and yet they talking about Asian hate, and they showing black examples of it. And the person they showed was a person that was out of their mind that would have assaulted anybody. Nothing. So, you know, and all of them jumped on. 3 or 4 women jumped on. So, you know, in any event, that's just not proper leadership. It goes against church doctrine to marry 2 gay men or gay women. It goes against church doctrine. And so you're not in any jeopardy with respect to your tax status or anything else. You chose to do that because there are white churches that will tell you in a minute, I am not marrying 2 men or 2 women. There was even a white baker that refused to make a cake that had 2 gay guys engaged in all kind of stuff.
Last year.
You can imagine, the baker said, hell no, I'm not going to do it. And they tried to take the baker to court. He said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to make a cake, or y'all doing what y'all do. So, you know, so.
He probably didn't have the right frosting to design the way he.
So, you know, that's that. So, if y'all have any questions, you could ask. If not, I just want to say for the record that I want to commend again Ray Ray so much for all that he's done. I want to thank you honored me by coming out to the program, and that and we have just a lot of things we're going to do down the road, and we just love the fact that you came out tonight. I know the sacrifices that Ray and so many other people made to make this thing happen. I love the fact that Deidre and others always sending me information that I can either use here or use on Community College and the like. But just want to thank everybody and say, let's continue to make this work, and in that way, we can inform each other. Dr. Amos Wilson, Francis Quest Wellsing, Leola Maddox, just so many that make the Dr. Mackey experience right and correct, and we should continue to uphold their names. In African philosophy, it says if you always call their name, they're still with us, they're not dead. So I like it anytime when Ray started talking, he mentions all of their names. So that energy in African philosophy goes out, because we need to have that energy. So to Dr. Amos Wilson, who he had dinner with and ate with, and that sort of
Numerous
occasions. And I wish that I was able to sit at the table and talk to Dr. Amos Wilson. I would have loved to experience that, because that's one of the brightest minds that you can imagine. I wish that I had that opportunity. First time I saw him at United African Movement, I said, wow, that's like Malcolm. He was just laying it so strong and just so precision in his fight against white supremacy and the elevation of black people. I said, oh my goodness, he is incredible. So I'm jealous of the fact that I didn't get to have dinner with him like Ray
Or Mackey.
or Professor Mackey, so he could talk about those things I can't. I know them from lecturing and the great work they did and the books that they left behind them. So that's a statement for everybody. We have their books, we have their legacy, we have their videos, but you know, it's that understanding, so I know what drives Ray to keep this going. But I thank you for honoring me by having me here tonight.
Thank you, good morning. Thank you, Brother Mike. Mike is right. We have one of the original members of Mackey, Brother Coleman here. He tell you. Not only sitting at the feet of the great William Mackey Jr., also Louis Ray Rivera will come down here and speak for hours. And he come out of Marcy. There'd be two people here. Me, COVID, Brother Hussar, and Mackey would speak for hours in the basement of the building on Prospect, across the street from the Church Museum. So to keep St. Mark's. So to keep these people's name alive, as people know they would listen to Dr. Clark, Dr. Ben. We never want these people to be forgotten because they paid. Miss Leola would drive that car
That's right.
from T-Net because she believed in bringing people together. So we never,
Yes, sir.
never, because you leave it up there, just let them go into the sunset. And they will be a forgotten people, like they're trying to say we are now. They've already given us the museum. The museum is there, once a great people. They were once a great people. So when you give the sacrifice, it is. And that's why, Brother Mike, we're going to have Mendelssohn, Dr. Lewis. So we just keep trying and trying and trying. God, because information.